Welcome back to The Vault, where the most precious and powerful stories are kept safe for the future of our shared humanity. We unlock the secrets of the heart and the mind through stunning visuals and moving narratives. Click subscribe now and gain access to the soul.
The radio came on by itself, not slowly, not with static first, just on full volume. Like someone had been waiting to press play. I remember my hands jerking on the wheel. The Kia swerved maybe 6 inches before I corrected it. My heart already slamming against my ribs. It was 1:47 in the morning. I know because I looked at the clock on the dash. The second the music started, the way you instinctively check the time, when something startles you. Like the numbers might explain it. The song was Landslide. The one she hummed in the kitchen every Sunday morning while the coffee brewed. The one she requested at her own birthday dinner, 3 years in a row, and cried every single time, because she said, Stevie Nicks understood something about getting older that most people refuse to admit. The one we played at her funeral 14 months ago, while I sat in the front pew holding my sister's hand so hard I left marks on her palm. I reached for the radio dial. My hand was shaking. The volume dial didn't respond. I turned it left all the way. The music didn't change. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I pressed it again. The song kept playing. Stevie Nicks's voice filling every corner of my car, like the sound had weight to it. Like it was pressing against the windows from the inside. I said, out loud to no one, what is happening right now? It had been a long drive. It always is when I visit my sister. She lives in a town 3.5 hours from me. In the kind of place where the highway turns into a 2-lane state road. And the 2-lane road eventually thins into something that isn't quite a road anymore. Just a suggestion of one through the dark. I'm a physical therapist. I had taken Friday off to drive up and spend the weekend, and by Sunday evening I was tired and full of pot roast, and more than ready for my own bed. I left her house around 10:30. She had offered to let me stay another night. But I have early patients on Monday and I don't sleep well in guest rooms. I told her I'd call when I got home. She walked me to my car in her bare feet, despite the October cold, and I told her to get inside, and she laughed and waved from the porch. And that was the last normal moment before everything got strange. The drive was uneventful for the first 2 hours. I had a podcast going. Something true crime that I've been listening to in small doses for months, because I can only handle so much darkness at a time. Around midnight, I turned it off and drove in silence for a while. There's a stretch of highway in that part of the state, I-64 West, before you get to the interchange, where the road curves through a series of low hills, and there are no lights. No towns, no gas stations for about 20 miles. I've driven it a dozen times. I know where I am, I know how far I have to go, and I don't need GPS. I had my phone mounted on the dash but the screen was dark. I hadn't opened a navigation app. I was just driving. That's important. I need you to understand that. I wasn't using any app. I wasn't streaming music from my phone. The radio power button was off. I'm almost certain of it, and my phone was silent. I verified this when I got in the car at my sister's house, because I sometimes accidentally leave Bluetooth running and it drains the battery. The radio came on by itself. For a full 30 seconds I just drove. I didn't know what else to do. My brain was running through logical explanations, the way it does when something doesn't make sense. Some kind of electrical short, a setting I accidentally changed, a Bluetooth connection that had somehow found a signal and auto-played. There are explanations for things. There are always explanations for things, except I couldn't change the station, couldn't lower the volume, couldn't turn it off. And then, and I know how this sounds, the song stopped mid-lyric. Not at the end of a verse, not at a natural pause. Right in the middle of the line, I've been afraid of changing. It just stopped. And the radio was quiet for maybe 3 seconds. And then a sound came through the speakers that was not music. It was not static. It was not a voice, exactly. But it was something that made the shape of words. It said, don't take the exit. I grabbed the steering wheel with both hands. There's an exit. Exit 41 Route 622 South, that I sometimes take as a shortcut when traffic apps are showing slowdowns further ahead. I know it well. It shaves maybe 8 minutes off my drive and it takes you through a small county, where the road runs along a ridge with nice views if you're driving in daylight. At 1:47 in the morning, with no moon and low cloud cover, it would have been completely dark. I had been considering taking it. I had been thinking about it since the last mile marker, because the podcast I'd turned off had been making me tired. And I figured the new road would keep me alert. I had my turn signal on, not on like I'd decided. On like my hand had moved there automatically. The way it does when your muscle memory is already ahead of your conscious thought. The green arrow was blinking on my dashboard. I sat with the blinker on for another quarter mile, staring at the sign for exit 41 as it came up and then passed. I didn't take it. I turned the blinker off. My mouth was dry. I kept driving. The radio stayed silent for a long time after that. Not off. I could tell the difference. There was a kind of live quality to the silence. The way a phone line sounds different when someone's still on it, versus when they've hung up. But silent. No music, no words. I drove with both hands on the wheel, and my eyes very wide and the heater going, because at some point I'd gotten very cold, despite the fact that the temperature hadn't changed. I kept checking my mirrors. I don't know what I expected to see. There was nobody behind me. There was nobody in front of me. Just the road and the reflective markers at the edges and the pale sweep of my headlights through the dark. I was maybe 4 miles past exit 41 when I saw the lights. Red and blue. Far ahead. Maybe 1.5 miles. 2 miles up the road. Right at the bottom of one of those long sweeping curves where the hills open up. I thought police. I thought accident. I slowed down, even though I was already going 60, and started drifting to the left lane to give them space. As I got closer I could see it was bad. There were 2 state police cruisers, and what looked like a fire engine, and 3 or 4 other vehicles arranged across the road in a way that made my stomach drop. One of the cars, I could see it as I came around the curve and the headlights caught it, had gone through the guardrail on the right side of the highway, where the ridge drops off. It was a 40-foot embankment at minimum. I've been on that stretch in daylight. I know what's down there. A trooper stepped out with a flashlight and waved me down. I rolled my window down. He was young, early 30s, tired looking, with a coffee cup balanced on the hood of his cruiser, like he'd been there a while. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to slow down and move through this area carefully. We've got a pretty significant situation here," I said. "What happened?" He hesitated the way people do when they're deciding how much to say. "Vehicle went through the barrier about 2 hours ago. We're still working the scene." I asked if everyone was okay. He didn't answer that directly. "Can I ask where you came from this evening?" he said. I told him I'd come from my sister's place 3.5 hours north. I told him I'd been on 64 the whole way. "Did you come through exit 41? The cold was back. Worse than before." "No," I said. "I passed it." He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at his notepad. "Any chance you came through about 2 hours ago? Before we had the scene blocked?" "No. I would have been further north 2 hours ago." He nodded slowly. "Okay, drive safe." He waved me through. I drove past the scene at 15 miles per hour with my hazard lights on, and I didn't look at the car through the guardrail, and I kept my eyes on the road. And as soon as I was past the lights, I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there for a long time with the engine running. The radio was still silent. I thought about exit 41. Exit 41 comes back onto the highway, at a junction about 1.5 miles before that curve. If I had taken it, I would have rejoined 64 exactly at the point where that car had gone through the barrier. At approximately the time, if the trooper's estimate was right, when the scene was happening before they had it blocked, before the cruisers were there, in the dark, on a curve, with debris and emergency vehicles that I wouldn't have been able to see until I was already in it. I sat on the shoulder of I-64 at 2 in the morning, and I thought about my mother. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I've told this story to a few people since, and I've noticed I'm tempted to make it tidier than it was. To say I felt peaceful, or certain, or like some beautiful understanding had settled over me. That's not what it was. What it was terrifying, and confusing, and underneath the fear there was something that felt almost like grief. A fresh, specific grief that I wasn't prepared for. Because if I let myself believe what I thought I was believing, that my mother, who is dead, had somehow come through my car speakers in the middle of the night to keep me from getting on an exit ramp, then I had to also sit with the fact that she'd been there, somewhere, all this time, watching, and she'd been quiet until tonight, until this specific moment, and I didn't know what that meant, or whether she could hear me, or whether she would ever do it again. I said out loud, "Thank you." It felt inadequate. Everything I could have said would have felt inadequate. I waited another few minutes. The radio stayed quiet. Eventually I put the car back in drive. I got home at 3:20. I didn't call my sister that night because it was too late and I didn't know what I would say. I went inside and fed my cat, who was annoyed with me for being out so long, and I sat on my couch in my coat and tried to think through everything logically one more time. The radio malfunction, possible. Electrical issues happen. My car is a 2019 and has never given me trouble, but there's a first time for everything. The song. Coincidence, maybe. Landslide is a well-known song. It plays on classic rock stations and adult contemporary stations, and sometimes on country stations if they're doing a special. Any radio malfunction that pulled in a random signal could theoretically have pulled in that song. The voice? I don't know. I've turned this over more times than I can count. I've asked myself whether I imagined it. Whether the fear and the fatigue and the dark and the song all combined into something my brain assembled into words. I've asked whether there's some other explanation I haven't thought of. I've sat with not knowing for 14 months and I still sit with it. What I know is that I didn't take the exit. What I know is that if I had, I would have been at that curve in the road at the wrong time. What I know is that my mother loved me so fiercely, so specifically, so without reservation or condition, that she spent the last 3 months of her life worrying out loud about whether I would be okay after she was gone. Not in a morbid way, but in the way of someone who has a lot of love and not enough time left to deliver all of it. She made my sister promise to check in on me. She wrote me a letter, which I've never been able to finish reading, which is sitting in my nightstand right now in its original envelope. She asked me, the last week she was coherent, whether I was happy. Not okay, happy. If something of her is still out there paying attention. If love is the kind of thing that doesn't entirely stop just because the person does, then I think I know whose voice that was as. I think I know why she picked that song. The following week I took my car to a mechanic and asked him to check the electrical system, specifically anything related to the radio or the infotainment panel. He ran a full diagnostic. He found nothing. Everything looks clean, he said. You're not having any issues? Not anymore, I said. I went home and sat with my cat in my lap. And finally, for the first time since the funeral, I opened my mother's letter. I'm not going to tell you what it said. Some things are not for telling, but I'll say this. The last line was on something she had written. Knowing I would read it when she was gone, knowing I would need something to hold on to in the dark spaces that grief leaves behind. And when I read it, alone in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon with the November light coming through the blinds, I understood that she had already thought about all of it. The missing her. The not knowing if she could still hear me. The question of what remains when someone you love is no longer in the world. She had an answer. Or at least she had what she believed, which I think is the most any of us can offer. I still drive that stretch of highway. I still pass exit 41 sometimes, the green sign lit up against the dark. I always go a little slower there now. I always think of her. And sometimes, not always, just sometimes, I could swear the car fills up with the faint smell of her coffee. The Sunday morning kind. The kind she made in the little percolator she refused to replace even when we bought her a Keurig. Because she said the old way tasted better, and she wasn't going to apologize for knowing what she liked. I don't change the radio station when it happens. I just drive.